us something. Thank you all so much for being a part of tonight. I'm not going to tell you what happened to my ankle. You're going to have to come in December and hear the story there. If I get selected, because I have to pitch my story. If you want to pitch a story for December, you can do that. The theme in December is, did that really happen? And if you want to pitch a story, you can call the pitch line, 406-203-4683. All right, some housekeeping stuff. This presentation is being recorded by Missoula Community Access Television as part of a media assistance grant donated to Tell Us Something by MCAT. When you walked in, you were handed an audience participation paper. Please share your It's Complicated story on that sheet. You can drop it into the red boxes located at the bar. During intermission, or right after intermission, we will have a couple of volunteers come and select a few of those from the box and read them from the stage. So, before I go on to that next bit of housekeeping, I just wanted to say thank you all so much for being here tonight to support live storytelling in Missoula. You are part of an historic event in Tell Us Something's 7-year history. We have never sold out in advance. Thank you so much for being part of this. The evening is going to be incredible. Please silence your cell phones and other mobile devices. You came to listen. Let the listening begin. It is important to actively listen to one another, to join together and to support each other and share stories. This is your community. These are your stories. Tell Us Something believes that everyone has a story and everyone's story matters. Tonight, you will hear 8 storytellers share their true personal story from memory. Every Tell Us Something event is focused on a theme. Tonight's theme is, It's Complicated. I hope that our first storyteller is here. I haven't seen her yet. If she isn't, we will put her in the mix later in the evening, and we'll move on to the second storyteller. But let's give it a shot. Well, first, let me just ask. Liz, are you here? Excellent! Jenny, can you please bring her backstage? Oh, great. Liz Boheim moved to Montana to work on a dude ranch for the summer after college and just kept finding excuses to stay. The 18 flight connections to get to upstate New York provides a nice buffer from her very large and loving family. She can most often be found walking the sidewalks and trails of Missoula with her 4-legged main squeeze, Hugo. Please welcome Liz Boheim.
The first time I said out loud that I wanted to find my birth parents, I was 11 years old in a therapist's office. My parents were getting a divorce, and they wanted to make sure that I was okay, so they sent me to see a psychologist who had an office in an old Victorian mansion in upstate New York, downtown Syracuse, and where we met was in the front room. It must have been an old library because it had beautiful woodwork and bookshelves that went up to the ceiling. I sat on a giant leather couch across from a man with a mustache who asked me questions about my feelings. And that was totally new for me. My parents weren't feelings people, so I was completely uncomfortable and really didn't have much to say. I wasn't angry and I wasn't sad, and it had been hammered into me that it wasn't my fault. So we talked instead about my birth parents, And up until that point, I'd always known that I was adopted, but it took the form of daydreaming or stick figure drawings, wondering if they had brown hair like me, if they lived nearby, whether they were looking for me. And my parents would soon remarry and start new families. I was an only child, so I leaned really hard into the idea of finding my birth parents because I wanted to belong to somebody. I had never been related to anyone or had that feeling of looking like another person, and I craved more than anything that click of recognition that families have, where you hear somebody say, I have my dad's eyes, or I get my chin from this person, or the way I push my hair behind my ear is the same as my sister. So that's what I really wanted. The therapist told me that there wasn't anything I could do at this point, but that when I turned 18, I would have access to public records that would help me to find my birth parents. So that became a beacon, a goal that I worked towards. And I started writing letters about my accomplishments, reasons that someone should be proud of me or want to love me. And then when I turned 18, I called the lawyer who facilitated my adoption, and he told me that I had been misinformed. That not only was my adoption closed, but it was also private, so there were no records. If they existed for other people, they didn't exist for me. I was heartbroken, but I was also really pissed. Nobody thought to mention this in the 7 years that I had been planning and talking about it. And also, he knew, this lawyer, he knew where to find them. And of course, he was legally bound not to tell me, but I knew he knew. And around the same time, my mom did tell me, though, that she had years past been at a party and somebody had pointed out to her my birth father. And that's a whole other story, how they happened to be at the same place. But she did learn, she didn't meet him, but she learned his first name was Henry and that he had been a law student at the university in my hometown when I was born. I didn't get all of the information that I wanted or needed, but I got some of it, and that felt like a little bit, it softened the blow. But I didn't have anything that I could do with the information. This was pre-Facebook, and I was still asking Jeeves for things online. So it was a lot harder to find people. And anyway, I was going to college, and it just didn't seem to take priority anymore. It was put on the back burner while I, studied for finals and things like that. And it wasn't until after I graduated, I had already moved to Montana and I was doing seasonal work, and I was back home between ranch season and ski season and had some downtime. And I realized I know how to use an academic library. You could Google somebody, and it was before Facebook put in those privacy settings, so you could still find your preschool sweetheart. And so I took myself on a field trip to the law school library, and they have a book there that has every graduate's name, their law office address, and phone number. So I found all of the Henrys who had graduated within a 5-year period of when I was born. 2 of them had law offices in New York City. One of them had a law office in the small-ass town of Gouverneur in northern New York, which happens to be about an hour from the small-ass city of Watertown, New York, where I was born. So I felt pretty good that this was my guy. And the law school also had these helpful visual aids. Along the corridor, there were these big composite posters that had headshots of all of the graduates per year. So I found all of the Henrys and used my flip phone to take low-res pictures of all of them for comparison. I really liked the one I thought belonged to me. He seemed really friendly. At this point, I had a first name and a last name. I had an address, and I had a phone number. But all of a sudden, the reality of actually getting in touch kind of hit me. It had never occurred to me before then that they might not want to be found, that it might not be a good contact, it might not be good news to hear from me. So I realized that if the answer was no, or if the answer was no answer, I wasn't ready for it. I couldn't handle that rejection. So I took the contact information, I put it in a drawer, and I waited for 4 more years. When I was 25, I opened up the Word document, the letter that I had been revising for almost 15 years. And by this point, it had evolved. I had added a lot of accomplishments. But instead of asking to be loved, the tone of the letter more so said, these are the things that I'm proud of. These are the things that I've done and the person that I've become. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to be this person, to have this life. I didn't need anything from them anymore. They had already given me everything that I needed. And so when I sent the letter, I felt that if I never heard anything back, it would be okay. And even if I heard no, I was going to be okay. About 2 weeks passed, and I got an email from Henry, who said he had been expecting to hear from me for a long time, and he was very happy to hear from me. And he put me in touch with my birth mother, and she was just as happy and excited. And we made an arrangement to meet when I went back home for Christmas in another small-ass city in upstate New York. And it was the best possible scenario that you could imagine for an adoption reunification. They were super warm, they were super loving. We spent an afternoon together, and they told me the story of their relationship, and I told them about myself. But I never got that click. I never had that moment of epiphany and recognition that I had always wanted. And I don't know that if I had gotten it, that I would feel differently now. It's hard to say. But I left that meeting really happy that I had gone, feeling like I had accomplished a project that was pretty much my whole life in the making, and that I could close the chapter and move forward. I'd spent so much time preparing for the very worst that I never anticipated the best possible outcome, that they would not only want to know me, but want me to be a part of their families. I never planned to go to clam bakes at Grandpa's house. I had never had a grandpa before. And I, as an only child, could never have expected to sit in a pew with 6 of my siblings at Mass. So I wasn't very good at doing family. I didn't have practice doing it, and I wasn't really sure I wanted to start at the age of 25. I had spent a long time mitigating my expectations and my needs, and I hadn't really planned or prepared for the fact that there were these 2 people, and they did have brown hair, and they didn't live very far away from me, but that they weren't stick figures, they were full, complex, complicated human beings who had their own expectations and their own needs of me. And I haven't been very good at fulfilling them or meeting them, but they do love me, they keep trying, and so do I. So thank you.
That side way works pretty good. Thanks, Liz. Arthur Weatherwax is an enrolled tribal member of the Blackfeet Band of the Blackfoot Nation. Arthur is known by his family and friends, as well as hospital staff from Great Falls Benefits East and West, as a walking, talking miracle. Arthur wakes up every morning remembering the challenges that he has overcome and acknowledging that not everyone works as hard as he did. Arthur also realizes the importance of family and friends who motivated him. Please welcome Arthur Weatherwax.
Mic check. All right. Okay, Nixo Quacks. Nistu, Nitanaku, Inadoski, Ki AJ Arthur Weatherwax. In my native tongue of Blackfeet, I introduced myself. I said, "Hello, my friends. my name is AJ Arthur Weatherwax. I would like to first thank you all for coming here tonight, this evening. I'm sure you all have better things to do, like Sunday night football or something. I thank you all for coming here to hear our true stories. Before I tell my story, I would like to give you a little history about myself. Before my accident, I was born a healthy, normal young man. I enjoyed skiing. I knew how to ride a horse. I was on the chess team. I played baseball, where I was a heavy hitter. I played basketball, which I was not that good at. I also was a powwow dancer. My dance was traditional and then grass. Sometimes my uncle would check me out of school for cultural reasons and would take me hunting or fishing instead. It was a great life. This all came to an end. It was homecoming night in Browning, Montana in the year 2000. I asked my father, Dad, can my cousin Dustin and I go to the store and get some soda? He said, sure. Just remember to come to a complete stop at all the stoplights and stop signs. So my cousin and I headed out, drove past the store, and headed up to a homecoming party in East Glacier, Montana. While we were at this party, I should have known that something was going to happen that night because a friend had suggested that I go home. But I didn't listen. I continued to party. As we were leaving the party, my cousin drove us to his house, which was 30 miles south of East Glacier in a sub-community called Old Agency. Before my cousin got out of the car, he begged for me to stay the night at his house. But knowing that we were all drunk and in my father's car, I did not trust the vehicle in the hands of my friends who had hopped in with us at the homecoming party. So, I drove approximately a quarter of a mile down a dirt road. I began passing out at the wheel. My friends would have to constantly be shaking me to wake me up. Finally, I got to the T intersection of Highway 2 and Old Agency Road, and I pulled over and I asked, who was sober enough to drive? One of my friends replied, I'll drive. So I got in the back seat where force of habit made me put on my seatbelt. He began to drive us the rest of the way to town. While we were in town, he took a curve too fast, sliding on some gravel, which the car hit a curb, which rolled numerous times and hit a house. The driver of the car was ejected out of the driver's side window, landing on top of the roof of the house, suffering only a few scrapes and bruises. The passenger of the car was with me when the car was rolling into the house, and he suffered a severe spinal injury, which left him paralyzed from the waist down. I was sitting in the back seat. The seatbelt that I had on wrapped around my neck and left me hanging possibly 10 to 30 minutes. They don't know how long. When emergency crews responded to my accident, they were having problems starting the jaws of life. And thanks to an EMT who happened to be one of my relatives, he was able to start the device, which ultimately freed my friend and myself. Meanwhile, my dad decided to go look for us. He took the first left turn from his residence. He saw flashing red and blue lights. As he drove close to the accident, he recognized the hubcaps that were on his car, and he knew that I was in an accident. He pulled over to see what was going on. He seen my cousin evaluating me. They took me up to the hospital in Browning, where my family quickly gathered to send support, love and support, and they see what my prognosis was. They were told by the ER doctor in Browning that I had died, but that I had been brought back to life with a 3% chance to live. Life flight was called to fly me to the hospital in Great Falls. While I was in medical flight, flying down in Great Falls, I died again in the helicopter. When I got to the hospital in Great Falls, I was upgraded to a 4% chance to live. I had to learn how to. When I got to the hospital in Browning, They did a MRI on me. They noticed that I dislocated 3 vertebrae in my neck. I busted 2 ribs. One of the ribs scratched and punctured my right lung, and had severe cerebral pressure on my brain. So when I got down to Great Falls, they redid the MRI again. They noticed that the 3 vertebrae in my neck had shifted back into place. They rushed me into emergency surgery where they cut my scalp open. They raised the flap of my scalp. They drilled 2 boreholes in my skull in an attempt to relieve the pressure. I was in a coma for 3 months. The whole time I was in this coma, my family and my friends were all with me, right by my bedside, saying prayers, sacrificing, making vows on my behalf to live. When I woke up from this coma, I had to learn how to walk, talk, eat, sleep, drink, everything that everybody has to do. It was like being a newborn baby, but this time I was 18 years old. When I recovered enough to function in everyday life, in order to keep my morale up, I decided to go back to school because my parents were both educators. I decided to go to school and get my high school diploma instead of a GED. I went to high school. I graduated from high school in 2002 after 5 years of schooling. Schooling was very difficult with the brain injury. When I graduated in 2002, I wanted to get a Bachelor of Arts degree. But first, I needed to obtain an Associate of Arts degree, which I did. And I got an Associate of Arts degree in Chemical Dependency Prevention Practices in 2008. In 2015, while at the mountain campus of the University of Montana, I studied abroad in Lismore, Australia, at Southern Cross University for 6 months. It's amazing how similar the culture is that the Aboriginal people have to the Native Americans here in America. When I returned from Australia, I finished high school. I graduated with my BA degree in Native American Studies in 2017. 3 months later, I got a job working at Opportunity Resources, which I'd previously been a client for. Now, I assist clients the same way that they assisted me, and at the same time, I get to support myself. It feels great to be giving back. Thank you. I started running in marathons. I run the 5K in marathons. I don't know if that's a marathon, but I ran in the Missoula Marathon. I ran in the Bozeman Marathon. I ran in the Two-Bear Marathon up in Whitefish. I run for all those that can't. I am grateful for my family and my friends. I hope that my story tonight will warn of the dangers of drinking and driving and the importance of never giving up in the face of adversity. I hope that telling my story tonight will save at least one life, just one life. Seeing, walking, talking, breathing are things that I'm ever grateful for. Every morning that I wake up, I'm thankful to be alive. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you, Arthur. Marcia Williams blogs at citygirlgoeswest.com. She drives a 2010 Subaru, which she bought new in a single afternoon years before she visited Montana or even considered moving from Tennessee to Missoula. Please welcome Marcia Williams.
Thank you. Long ago and far away in a land called Tennessee, in 1997, my then husband and I decided that we needed another car. We had two, but it was a car-centric area, and our daughter was a teenager. She was driving. Our life was going to be a lot easier if we had a one-to-one correspondence between our cars and our drivers. Morgan, our daughter, unlike every other 16-year-old in the world, did not want a new car. She didn't even want a newer car. I had just started a business. I was meeting with clients and attorneys and accountants. We thought, well, we'll get a newer car for Marcia. We were driving 10 and 11-year-old cars, and Morgan can have my old car. Seemed like a good plan. We'd been married long enough. We had purchased 4 cars together. We'd been married long enough to have a teenage daughter. We went to the dealer where we had bought the last 2 cars. It was July 4th. Those of you who have not been in Middle Tennessee on July 4th, it is not like July 4th in Montana. It is not the first day of the year that you do not have to turn on the heat. It's hot, it's humid, it's disgusting. If you go out and you take a deep breath, you go, and you can't get enough oxygen because there's so much moisture in the air. David and I went to a car dealer. We spent, count 'em, 4 hours there. And if you're looking at used cars, you are outside. At the end of the 4 hours, we had not closed in on a car. And I said, you know, David, the 11-year-old car, it's good. I'm fine. He said, well, shoot, if you don't want a new car and Morgan doesn't want a new car, I'll get a newer car. And I'm thinking, if I don't have to go car shopping again, this works for me. This was 1997. There were mobile phones. They were approximately the size of a brick, and only real estate agents had them. I was at home one night. The phone rang. A gentleman, we will call him Bob, that was not his name, said, I just got a call from this number, maybe about a car. I said, David, this one's for you. Give him the phone. He talks to Bob. Bob has a 3-year-old car he's selling. David decides to meet him in that safe, neutral place, the Denny's parking lot. He goes, he meets with Bob. He comes back. I said, so, how'd it go? He said, well, Bob doesn't have any paperwork. He doesn't have a title or a registration. He doesn't have an owner's manual for his car. He said, I think it's a little fishy. So given the dubious provenance of Bob's car and our decision that we didn't need Hot Wheels, the process went on. David had seen an index card at work about someone there who was selling a station wagon. We were a family of 3. This station wagon was 8 years old, but David thought it was worth checking out. They did not have to go to Denny's since they worked at the same place. That night I asked him, so, how was the station wagon? He said, well, you know, the driver's window wouldn't shut all the way, and when you turned it on, the engine went thumpa, 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 thumpa. So even David rejected the station wagon. This was before the internet was really the commercial resource that it is now. So if you were looking for a car, you got Wheels and Deals. It was a newsprint magazine that came out, I think, every couple of weeks, and it had itty-bitty pictures of the vehicles with short, abbreviated descriptions of them. And David became a devoted reader of Wheels and Deals. He'd be on the couch watching TV, reading every word of Wheels and Deals, and I'd hear, hey, Marcia, come here. And I'd, of course, go trotting in. This gives you some insights into the marriage and maybe why it didn't last 30 years. And he'd say, here it is, I've got it. And I'd say, well, tell me. He said, it's only 7 years old and it's $15,000. Now, there is a lot of information being left out of that. I said, so, Tell me more. What else does it say? He said, well, this is a black Lincoln Continental stretch limousine. He said, it has 300,000 miles on it, but there are only 20,000 on this engine. It gets 14 miles to the gallon, and it has a cooler. And I'm thinking, a cooler. I don't know enough about cars to know if a Lincoln Continental stretch limousine needs an extra cooler for the engine. So I said, a cooler? He said, yeah, for the beer. I said, does it come with a uniform for the driver with the little hat? He said, no. I said, okay, that's not going to work. Time goes on. We'll talk about how much time a little later. He gets another edition of Wheels and Deals. Again, the same thing. Marcia, come here, I found it. I go trotting in. He said, here it is. It's a Rolls Royce. It's 27 years old. I mean, we're trying to get our average fleet age down from 10 and a half years old. This thing is 27 years old. I said, what else does it say? And I quote here because I would not have phrased it this way. It says, it runs good. I said, I know that car. I pass that car every morning on my commute. It's on Hillsborough Road. There are 2 signs in the window. One of them says for sale and it has a phone number. The other one is on poster board. It's scrawled in all capitals. It says, do not drive this car. It has no brakes. I said, it runs good. It don't stop. At this point, 2/3 of the people I work with have purchased additional vehicles since we started this process. One of them has been getting the updates, and he said, for God's sakes, Marcia, it is not this hard. Will you just tell me what the parameters are, give me a budget, and I'll buy you the damn car? Obviously, if we'd done that, I wouldn't be here telling you, because we're getting to the really good part, okay? Now, I was a math major, so I'm pretty good at recognizing patterns, and I have not picked up any sort of pattern in the vehicles that David is considering. So I am surprised. Now, this was not from the couch in front of the TV. He actually came into the kitchen and he said, Marcia, I know the car I want. And it's like, tell me. He said, there is a new Camry at the dealer here in town, and that's what I want to get. And I said, please, go. He said, would you like to come? Best answer I ever gave. No, thank you, because I had been by the dealer that morning, and they had erected chain link fence around it. And there were all of these people milling about. And I said, so what's going on? He said, well, it's Oktoberfest. Now, you remember we started this in July. We're 4 months later, Oktoberfest. And at Oktoberfest, the dealer sells one vehicle for $88, but you have to be there. Now, David goes over, and because it's Oktoberfest, in addition to the chain link fence and the people interested in the $88 vehicle, we will refer to them simply as being interesting. They have extra balloons. They have dancing women. They have a DJ playing rock and roll music. I suspect they have bratwurst in the back. David and Morgan go, and you don't just go to the office and find a brown-suited car salesman and say, I'd like to buy a Toyota. You go to the car that you're interested in and you sit in it. But of course, there's a lot going on with the balloons and the music and the people waiting for the $88 car, and you start tooting the horn. So you're in the car, you're tooting the horn, the balloons are blowing in the wind, the ladies are dancing, the music is going, the bratwurst is starting to burn. These men are milling about for the $88 car, and you're tooting the horn. At this point, you are surrounded. Okay, I mean, it's like it just gets better and better. I said, surrounded by what? He said, you are surrounded by car salesmen. I said, and then what? He said, well, they start chanting. I said, well, what do they start chanting? And they start chanting, slash it, slash it, slash it. I said, slash what? Slash the price. And so then the slasher comes. I said, now I'm not there, so I've got to mental image of the slasher looking like death with the shroud and the sickle to slash the price that's been inflated in order that he can slash it. And so he's slashing the price until he gets it to one that you're willing to accept. And I'm thinking, you know, you're trapped in a car, you're surrounded by car salesmen, there's the music blaring, boom, 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 you've got the balloons, the dancing women, all the men milling about, they've got the fence keeping people out or in, and you know, you're not in a really good negotiating position. I also noticed that when David came home, that he and Morgan were in one vehicle, and it was the same vehicle that they had gone in, and I said, so, what about the car? He said, it had tinted windows. Mercifully, a few weeks later, he came home in a gently used Volvo, which became our third car. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. Hope I don't have to figure this out next time. Get your tickets early for December and find out. Jim. Ray Risho is a chef, former restaurateur, and an independent scholar, teaching and currently working with a team of people to write a book on global cuisine. Please welcome Ray Risho.
I don't know. Is that good? So tonight, I'm planning to speak about my artistic signature and how that happened. Of course, Susie and I have lived here for 50 years. We came here since we were newlyweds in 1968. So to do this, to describe 50 years in 10 minutes, that's complicated. So I want to begin with the persona that I developed throughout the years in Missoula, and that is, we invite you to turn aside for an evening of old world hospitality and cooking. So I'm going to have to take you back a couple of thousand years. Last year, I took a course at the university from Tom Lee, and it was on the Dead Sea Scrolls. And in the first lecture, there on the PowerPoint presentation was a picture of the man who bought the scrolls from the shepherds. After the class, I went to Tom and I said, Tom, the picture of the guy that bought the scrolls. I said, I've met him. Tom said, what? I said, yeah, he actually came to my house when I was a preteen. So of course I had to tell him the story, and what actually happened was that particular man eventually became the Bishop of North America for the Assyrian Orthodox Church. And in those years, there would only be half a dozen in the whole continent. And his base was in Hackensack, New Jersey. He decided to come up to Rhode Island to visit the church there. And wouldn't you know it, but the elders of the church brought him to my mom's house. Here was a widow. However, she was the essence of hospitality. And to see all this venerable man walk in with all the elders, and my mom hosted them with food and beverages and pastries, it was incredible. But that's how I grew up. I grew up with the fullness and the richness of good food and hospitality. And so now, let's go to a little further beyond. After I got out of the Army, I was working, I was going to school in Providence, and then my brother got me a job in Provincetown, Cape Cod, in a restaurant. And I was a janitor there and a busboy. This was an unusual restaurant. This place, everything in the restaurant was handmade. There were probably more than 26 sauces on the menu. And every dish was an individual dish. That's how unique everything was in this place. And eventually, after several years, just by accident, I became the sous chef. They just brought me in, and I just had this innate talent for creativity. And whenever I asked the chef, the head chef, how much food do you, how much like basil do you put in a particular dish, or how much oregano do you put in this particular dish? And he always gave me two answers: a little bit and a good amount. There were never any recipes in this restaurant, as complicated as all the dishes were. And eventually, Susie and I met, we got married, and the next following year, the year we were married, here I was, the chef left, but I had written everything down in this restaurant. And so no one else could take the job but me, because I had all the recipes written down. And I gave this book to my youngest son and protege, Abe. He's here tonight, and I'm so delighted that he's here to hear this. So I became the executive chef, and it was such a wonderful experience for me. The most complex, the easiest dish for me became the most complex, and that was called veal scallopini alla marsala. And many of you here probably have had that dish. And what I did was it was just veal and mushrooms. That's all it was. There wasn't much to it. There were only like 6 ingredients in the dish. But when I made the dish, it was something special. I had to make it with 3 pans. The first pan had clarified butter in it, and I sauteed my mushrooms very quickly, and I seasoned them with salt, pepper, and dried basil, and mushrooms and marsala wine, and put them in a bowl. Then I put more clarified butter in that pan, and I started searing the veal, but only one side, and I turned the heat off. Then I had 2 other pans, and these were iron pans. And what I would do was I put the mushrooms back over the veal, and then I would reduce all of that liquid, the liquid from the meat, the mushrooms, the lemon, the wine. I would reduce all of that liquid until it became so viscous. And then at that moment, I would heat the other two pans so hot that I would transfer it, just slide everything out so gracefully. It would just slide into the next hot pan, and then I would take it and slide it into the next hot pan. And if you weren't careful, there was so much wine in the dish that if the wine splashed, the flames hit the wine and it burst into flames. And one night, Susie happened to be watching on the line, and lo and behold, all the tickets on the board burned. And she took a photograph of me doing this and Abraham standing behind me looking at this happening. It's a beautiful memory. So here's the core of what happened. In 1970, we decided not to return back to Provincetown to work, but we went for a visit. And I decided while we were there, I would give all the cooks a night off. And that was maybe 3, 4, 5 days. Because in the peak of the season, you work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, you never get a day off. So here I am, cooking on the line, and one night, there was a lull after a while. It was probably 9 o'clock, and I'm standing on the side, and this guy comes in the back room, the kitchen, and he yells my name, "Ray Risho!" I said, "Here I am." And he comes up to me and he says, I'm so excited, I needed to meet you. He says, "This is our favorite restaurant." He says, but I have to tell you what happened. I'm a lawyer from Scarsdale in New York, and my wife and I have a summer residence just south of Provincetown in Truro, and we come up here all the time. He said, last year I was here, I had veal scallopini, and it was probably the most beautiful dish I've ever had in my life. It was so memorable. And this is what I usually tell people when they're going to have a dinner and when they're going to get a dinner, that you're going to have memories that last a lifetime. And that's what he was telling me. This was in 1970. And he said, but this year, we came early in the season, and I was so excited, I ordered veal scallopini, and I couldn't believe it. He said it was a disaster. It was so bad, I decided I would never come back to this restaurant again. However, we have some guests visiting us from out of town here in Truro, and we decided to come back to Provincetown for dinner tonight. And we said, well, let's go back to Ciro's for one more time, give it one more shot. So we came into the restaurant tonight, and I said, well, well, I'm here tonight. I may as well order my favorite dish, which was the veal scallopini. And so I did. He says, and I couldn't believe it. It was exactly the way I had it last year. I was incredulous. It was amazing. I had to tell the waiter. And so I told the waiter what happened, and the waiter started smiling. And the waiter knew. He says, well, I happen to know what happened. He says, this guy was the best man at our wedding. He said, the guy who prepared your dish tonight is only here for a couple of nights. And it's the guy that prepared the same dish for you last year. It's the same guy. And at that moment, he said, I just have to meet this man. And then I realized, not at that very moment, but subsequently, how I could basically put a signature on anything that I did, anything that I prepared. I could make it my own. And that's what I pass off to people. And I just want to make a night tonight for you to remember, and that is, I'm going to just give you one line from one of my favorite songs. And it's by a guy named Robert Zimmerman, who won the Nobel in poetry. And that is, someday, everything's going to sound like a rhapsody when I paint my masterpiece. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. And thank all of you for coming out tonight to support live storytelling in your town. You know, part of our job at Tell Us Something is to help people get their stories heard. We do that here at the live event in Missoula 4 times a year. We've expanded to Helena, and we're going to be in Butte in November. We also help people get their stories heard on the podcast. And if you haven't subscribed to it, please subscribe to the Tell Us Something podcast with whatever podcast app you use. Rate us on iTunes and Stitcher. Leave us a review. That's how the podcast gets discovered, and that would be really, really helpful. Thank you to all of the storytellers tonight. Thank you to our ASL interpreters. Thank you, Logjam Presents, CabinetParts.com, the bookstore at the University of Montana, Fact and Fiction Books, Missoula Broadcasting Company, Enlighten Labs, hi Matt, Fildy Design, thank you Joyce, and Gecko Designs. When you frequent these businesses, please thank them, and Good Food Store, thank you Good Food Store. Please thank them for their support of Tell Us Something and of live storytelling in Missoula. And thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for your love, your open hearts, your respect, and your very presence. Without you, Tell Us Something wouldn't exist. We're going to have a brief 10-minute intermission, and we'll come back for audience participation afterwards. Stretch your legs, get a drink, tip your bartenders. Thanks for being here. We'll see you in 10 minutes. Let's roll with it. Welcome back. I'd like to introduce you to my friends, Lauren and Johanna Champa. This might be also a great opportunity for me to thank all of the volunteers who helped make Tell Us Something happen this time. Thank you, Stephanie and Yuba, for handing out handbills. Thank you, Bob, for all of the work that you're doing with the videos. Thank you, Lauren and Johanna, tonight. Thank you most especially to Joyce Gibbs. She has been busting her ass to try to help me and my gimpy ass. So thanks, Joyce. Who? Oh, yes, Jenny and Ellie and all the people. All the people. Thank you. Susan Maruka helped me go buy these jeans. Marissa France. All the things. So thank you so much to all the volunteers and helpers. Always look for the helpers. So we're going to do the audience participation piece. Lauren and Johanna are going to do 5 minutes of your anonymous stories, and then we'll come back for the second half of Tell Us Something. Can we get 5 minutes on the timer or somebody's phone, please? Okay, that works. All right, great.
Hello. Ooh. Okay. I have been informally adopted by my dead husband's dead wife's family. How is this possible? After she died of cancer in 1996, he began dating. We met in 2002. We married in 2010. He died of cancer in 2011. In 2012, I returned her things he had kept to her family. We've been family ever since. Explaining our relationship at family gatherings begins, it's complicated.
A night to remember. My husband and I were living in Nevada at the time. We decided to spend our Southwest Airline miles on a weekend in Santa Fe. Arriving late on a Friday night, we headed to Canyon Road, hoping that some of the Santa Fe's infamous art galleries would still be open. Although most were dark and shuttered, the lights were on and people were streaming into one, a lovely craftsman's building. The front room had a table at one side with photos. Info about the featured artists, we assumed skipped it, and began to explore the multiple small rooms filled with art. Uniformed waiters offered us wine and finger foods. This weekend was starting out well. We wandered into an outdoor sculpture garden, and my husband noted, "Well, looks like an escape route out this way." We heard someone inside calling the guests to gather in the front room. My husband offered to round up the stragglers, and shortly, 50 to 60 people were crammed together as candles were lit on the table and a few people started weeping softly. The woman standing at the table sighed deeply and then asked if anyone wanted to start by sharing their memories of the beloved. Oh my God, it was a wake. A waiter paused in front of us, took our empty wine glasses, and offered us fresh glasses. That was easy for him to do, as we were standing in the very front of the crowd of mourners. My husband, accepting another glass, avoided my stare. He downed it, took my hand, and started edging slowly to his left, heading for the sculpture garden and escape. Glass in hand, he edged toward the door. This time, I avoided all eye contact. A few minutes later, the glass safely on a marble statue, we left through the gate, a night to remember.
Age 26, female, student working full-time, 6 years of hardship. Life is hardly one complication after another, as I'm sure it is for almost everyone here. Writing a story about these complications in a succinct manner is a complication in itself. So let me give this a shot. A month ago, my wife left me after giving me 2 days' notice. I didn't know we had issues so drastic to warrant this. We are still together, but we are not. I want her to be happy no matter what. Foreshadows miscategorized to protect our current state. Illusions swept to subconscious, allowing the final chapter of bliss. Only our bones reverberate, truths hidden deep by minds and masked by hearts. Their longing ache, betraying false solace with immutable reality.
I was pulled over by the Monties while peeing out the passenger side door. It's complicated.
Try to keep rents low in Missoula is complicated. As an owner of a fourplex close to the U of and downtown, I try to keep the cost to my renters such that those working full-time at minimum wage can afford them, and not offer slum conditions. But Missoula property taxes keep going up. Last year, they almost doubled for me, and maintenance costs rises all the time. I love my renters, but I can't personally support them. It's complicated.
Losing your faithful companion of 14 years, the baby I didn't birth, the one we poured our love into, and now it's the two of us, alone. People I said I would know it was time, and I second-guessed myself. Grief does weird things.
I was seeing a guy casually for several months that I met on Tinder. Things fizzled out, as Tinder dates do. A few weeks later, I met a new guy, had a date, went to his apartment. I told him that he could pass as my last Tinder date's brother. He asked his name. I told him. He said, "No way, that's my roommate." I proceeded to make it awkward as hell. Then I went home. What can I say? I have a type. Thank you.
So, about 3 years ago, I dated a guy for a few months, and he ended the relationship. He said he wasn't ready for a commitment. Oddly, we were able to stay kinda sorta friends. About a year ago, he begged me for a second chance, and though very hesitant, I decided to give him another chance. 6 months later, I was sure I was going to marry him. Then, he broke up with me. Again. I was heartbroken, but we were able to connect as friends again later, and he is now my best friend. I'm now in a different relationship that has been going on for about a year. I love my new partner, but I'm also realizing that I still love my ex, AKA my best friend. It's complicated.
Well, thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Johanna. Are you ready for Act 2? Are you having a good time? Chris LaTray is a writer, a walker, and a photographer. His freelance writing and/or photography has appeared in various regional and national publications. His first book, One Sentence Journal, Short Poems and Essays from the World at Large, was recently released via Riverfeet Press. Chris LaTray is Chippewa Cree Métis and is an enrolled member of the Little Shell Tribe of Chippewa Indians. Please welcome Chris LaTray.
Did someone just wolf whistle? I could have sworn I heard one. So there's a story in my family about my father. This is late 60s, early 70s, I'm not sure what year. Out at the mill in Frenchtown, he's fresh out of the Navy, few years, and he's leaning on a rail in the mill proper. A guy walks up to him. It's kind of an apocryphal story, so you don't necessarily know what's true and what isn't. But when my dad would tell me, it's his foreman. He walks up on me, slaps him on the back, and he says, "How's it going, Chief?" Which for my dad was the only match you needed to light for the gasoline of rage that fueled him. And he chased this guy from one end of the mill to the other before he finally caught him. And when my dad would tell me the story, he said, "I grabbed that son of a bitch by the throat, and I said, 'Don't you ever fucking talk to me again.'" And he swears that he never did. And I've heard that story from my dad. I heard it from my sister who worked there for a while. I heard it from a couple other people. The reason my dad was so angry is he was Indian, and he hated the fact that he was Indian. And calling an Indian chief is something like calling an Indian squaw or naming a football team Redskins. You don't know what it means unless you live it. And my dad lived it. And to wonder how and why he felt that way, you have to kind of do a certain amount of speculation, because he never talked about it until the day he died. And as Mark announced, I am enrolled with the Little Shell tribe of Montana. And when my dad died on October 30th, 2014, I don't know if he ever even heard of the Little Shell tribe. It's only through investigation of my own that I've learned our family lineage. And if he knew it, he never talked about it. My grandparents would talk about it, that we were Indians. They said we were Chippewa. But when they died, I don't necessarily know if they knew about the Little Shell. So who are the Little Shell? Well, the Little Shell tribe is a part named after a specific band led by a chief named Little Shell, who broke away as a result of the 1892 Macomber Commission. So we are a people, a part of the larger Pembina tribe of Indians that live kind of in what we would call the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes, Canada. We're talking the Anishinaabe, Ojibwa, Chippewa. Like a horse or a dog, I have papers. My papers say I'm Chippewa Cree, Chippewa Cree Métis. But the Little Shell in 1892, the Macomber Commission, they came to that part of the country and saw all this land that the Indians had, and they said, "We want it. We're going to pay you fair market value," which was like $1 an acre. And the result of that was the creation of the Turtle Mountain Reservation in North Dakota. Little Shell said, "Nah, we're not interested." And the Fed said, "Well, if you guys don't sign on to this and go on the reservation, we're going to say that you essentially don't exist," which is true. We're a not federally recognized tribe. Little Shell said, "You know what? We don't recognize your borders. We don't recognize your laws, so we're just not going to play. We don't care what you say about our existence because we know who we are." Which to me, I love the fact that part of my lineage goes all the way back to just a big fuck you to the man. And I wish my dad knew about that. So I try and understand, the downside of that is that my grandparents' generation could be deported to Canada as Métis people. So they didn't want people to know they were Indian. Think about, we're only a couple generations removed from Native children being removed from their families so that they didn't learn their language and sent to these boarding schools. I don't know my language, which is not a surprise because I didn't know up until about a decade ago who I was. So you can understand why people like my father and a generation before him would try and keep it on the down low exactly what and where they came from. But we don't have a reservation. We have small concentrated communities in towns like Great Falls and Lewistown and places like that. But, you know, my dad never talked about it, and I like to think about what it was like for him growing up in the 50s in towns like Anaconda and Hamilton, and what it was like with no community to be a part of, you know, being called, you know, Indian or half-breed, which is what, you know, the derogatory term for what the Métis people are, or prairie nigger, things like that. What was it like to grow up that way with nobody to back you up, and your father is an alcoholic and he beats you? Who would own that you were Indian? You know, who is your community at that point? Your community becomes your rage and your ability to fight. And that's what my dad learned. He learned to drink probably by the time he was 13. The only thing that saved him was the Navy. And he came out of the Navy reinventing himself as someone who would only claim to be white. My grandparents would talk about us being Chippewa, and he would say, "Oh, that's bullshit." So you understand why, as a racist, probably the people he hated the most were Indians. And I grew up wondering who we are and where we came from. But at the same time, you know, I've learned some of that rage for different reasons. You know, I learned my rage because everybody made fun of me for being fat. I don't recall being, you know, hassled about being Indian, but it could have happened. People made comments here and there. So none of this sounds particularly complicated to me. I mean, it's easy for me to look at the colonial nature of the United States and be full of rage at times. And I don't let it get to the best of me. You know, I have my coping mechanisms. I meditate. I practice yoga. I walk in the woods. I try and be this earthy dude with greater levels of success from time to time. What's complicated about it is that I'm as white as any white person in this room as well. And that comes from my mother's family. And the fact that I don't drink and that I have a greater capacity to love than fight, you know, the kind of advice my dad would give me was, you know, if you ever get in a fight with somebody, you got to hurt them. You got to hurt them so bad that they know never to fuck with you again. Well, I've fortunately never been in a fight in my life, and I intend to keep it that way. And I credit the fact that my mother has been the largest influence in my life, and her mother. You know, I didn't know my paternal grandparents hardly at all, but my maternal grandmother was a big part of my life. You know, she was a big sports fan. When Ted Turner created the Superstation, we used to watch Atlanta Braves baseball. She took me to Grizzly basketball games. I remember one time, this is the 70s, Michael Ray Richardson. Does anybody here remember Michael Ray Richardson? He was a legitimate NBA superstar coming out of the Montana Grizzlies basketball program until he got a little caught up in drugs and got kicked out of the league and had to go to Europe. But my grandmother, and I have this vivid memory of them playing Gonzaga, and Sugar Ray Richardson lights them up for 40 points. And every time a foul gets called on the Grizzlies, the Grizz fans are like, bullshit, bullshit. And my grandma's over there just, because that's how she was. You know, she loved stuff like that, but I have another vivid memory of my grandmother walking into her kitchen wearing a T-shirt that I was so proud of. I was a huge Kiss fan. And Paul Stanley with a solo album picture that's purple. And Paul Stanley, like, hey, Mom, we didn't want to call her Grandma. We called her Mom. Mom, look at my shirt. And she's like, oh, honey. Oh, honey. So that was my grandma. And my mom is probably here tonight. She's been, you know, when my rock band used to play in Seattle, she would drive over to watch us play. She comes to everything I do. She's been my biggest fan. So that's the complicated part. Yeah, give it up for my mom. Thank you. Thank you. That's the complicated part. I'm every bit as much a white European Czech Dane as I am a raging Indian who wants to, like, drive everybody off the continent. And that's the complicated part of what we're trying to face in the world, and this country in particular at large, is how the hell do we get along with each other when we can hardly get along with ourselves? So you know, I mean, this isn't a story with like an arc and a big kicker funny ending, but I feel like if I can just deal with all my raging bullshit and still show up for work on time and be nice to people and yeah, if I can do it, you can do it. So thank you. Thank you.
Chris LaTray for president. All right. I'd vote for Chris. He's much taller than I am, though. Thank you, Chris. Stephanie Land's work has been featured in the New York Times, the New York Review of Books, the Washington Post, The Guardian, Vox, Salon, and many other outlets. She lives in Missoula, Montana. A warning for our more sensitive listeners, Stephanie's story features frank language about domestic violence. Please welcome Stephanie Land.
So my youngest daughter's favorite book lately has been Shel Silverstein's The Missing Piece. We read it in my bed at night, and then she asks me, "Can I please have your arm?" And I stretch it out for her to use as a pillow. Then she usually asks me to be covered by a blanket, and I lie there and wait for her body to start twitching, for her to make that final sigh before I can get up and go into my kitchen, pour myself a glass of wine if I have some, and stare at the floor. When I told my husband to move out last spring, Coraline was about to turn 4, and she started sleeping with me again at night. For those first couple of months, she would wake up in the middle of the night crying, asking why her mom and dad weren't there at the same time anymore. I never really knew what to tell her. And then she would ask me, "But don't you miss him?" And I would just say sometimes, even though that's not true. I have never, not even once, missed him. He hasn't lived with us for about 5 months now, and all I have to do is imagine him walking from one room to the next, and my body begins to show the signs of a panic attack. My friends have been really supportive throughout this whole divorce process, and a few of them have offered me some comforting words, telling me that they're sure that there is a man out there for me, one who will appreciate me and all that I have to offer. And I kind of chuckle at this, and I am tempted to say to them, why on earth would I want that? But that kind of thinking goes against the canon of almost every single story that we're told. I've watched my daughters take in the lasting kiss before the final end credits of so many movies, and I cringe at almost every one. Except my oldest daughter and I, Mia, have taken to watching some of my favorite movies from the 80s when we're traveling alone together. And at the end of the summer, we were having dinner, and I was quiet for a little bit. And then I started blurting out some kind of weird questions, like, what if Andy stayed with Ducky at the prom and didn't go out to chase Blaine into the parking lot? What if Johnny Castle didn't come back to do the final dance number and just moved on and opened up a dance studio, and then we saw Baby join the Peace Corps? So my daughter's 11, and she has a writer for a mother, and she's used to these weird outbursts. And she sat there and chewed her cheese quesadilla thoughtfully, and then she said, but it wouldn't be a story if it ended like that. And I said, "What do you mean? Like it wouldn't be complete?" And she said, "Yeah, it's only a real story if people fall in love in the end. That's how you know that they're gonna live happily ever after." So over the last year and a half, when people asked me about my happily ever after and what it was like to be a newlywed, I wasn't really sure what to tell them. Because 3 months after we were married, I'd called the police, and they'd come to my apartment and taken pictures of bruises on my neck. The police left that night just a little bit after midnight. My husband was already down at the station, and the dog was still completely losing her mind. And I stood in my kitchen, leaning against the counter, staring down at brochures and illustrated flyers on my table, demonstrating signs to watch for after experiencing strangulation. We were alone for several months after that, me and Coraline and me. Meanwhile, my husband told me that he would commit suicide if he was convicted of the felony or had to go back to jail. But most importantly, he made me feel like it was my fault that he had to hurt me. So I decided to advocate for him and for his charges to be lessened to a misdemeanor. I arranged meetings. I met with lawyers and prosecutors. I wrote statements and so many emails. I even stood in front of the judge and begged him to allow my husband to move back in with us so that we could go on being a family again. When the judge granted this, it had only been 4 months since my husband had strangled me, and he said because of that, it was against his own better judgment. I wish that I would have or could have said that it was against mine too, but the fog of the situation was so dense, I completely lost sight of my compass. I think maybe my desire as a single mom for that happy ending was like a rushing current that was too strong for me to fight. I knew that I had chosen a path, though I wouldn't have admitted it then, that was full of emotional landmines. I also knew that in walking that path, one of those landmines would detonate, only this time possibly with my death. When I started posting on Facebook this summer that I was single again, a few local women reached out to me, and they sent me kind of similar messages saying, "I was so worried about you." And it reminded me that there had been a newspaper article with my husband's mugshot as the main photo, and that I watched people share that on Facebook for several days. It made the lie that I'd been living, parading us all over town and social media as this loving couple for the last year, feel like some kind of wound that had opened up all over again. I hated it that I had done that I had hidden what he had done to me as much as possible. I ran from that article. I even emailed the editor of the newspaper, begging her to take it offline from their online archives. I isolated myself from my community. I didn't talk to close friends about what was going on or what had happened or about the emotional abuse that was happening at home, because admission would require action, so I didn't really talk to anybody. My whole life felt like a lie, but I was really good at telling the story, especially to me. So a few weeks before I told him to move out, we were all in the backyard together and playing catch. It was one of those days where it's just warm enough where you think winter's behind you. And I also felt like maybe the misery of winter was over and his court case was done. He'd just adopted my youngest, Coraline, and we were all so happy, and Mia turned to me and she said, "You really know how to pick the good ones, Mom." She was talking about her stepdad, a man that she had watched hurt me twice in one evening. I looked at her and I smiled, and then I looked over at him and I went inside to cry. Over the last several months, I've kind of been asking myself what my motivation was in keeping our life on the outside as normal as possible. And I think I maybe didn't want to disappoint anyone. I didn't want to let all of those people who were so happy for me down. Then I realized that I was included in that group. So, in the book, The Missing Piece, the reader follows this really simply drawn line throughout all of the pages. And on this line is a circle with a triangle-shaped piece missing, a lot like a piece of pizza. And so the circle goes along singing this silly song about looking for its missing piece. And in the meantime, it meets worms and beetles and frogs, and butterflies land on it, and it stops to look at flowers. And after a few failed attempts, it does find its missing piece. Only it can't sing anymore, and it starts rolling so fast that it can't stop to look at flowers or talk to frogs or beetles. Things start tumbling so out of control that it sets the piece down, scoots away, and starts singing again. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Steve Brester and his wife are native Missoulians, graduating from Sentinel and Hellgate, respectively. They both attended University of Montana and have been married for 34 years. They have 3 adult children and 2 grandchildren. Steve is a retired City of Missoula police officer who served from 1992 to 2012. Please welcome Steve Brester.
So one of the proudest days of my life was when I got hired at the police department in 1992. I'd worked really hard to get there, and very competitive back then. And for the next 20 years, I served this community with honor and with pride and with professionalism. And my career became who I was. And being a cop is stressful. And a lot of guys deal with it by, some guys run, some guys go to the gym or whatever. I drank. So I'd go to work all day, do my cop thing. When I got home at night, though, I drank. I drank to relieve my stress. And this continued for many, many years. When about 16 or 17 years into my career, I developed a issue with chronic pain in my back. And I did all kinds of, I went to the doctor, did all kinds of imaging and tests, and they tried different things to fix it. Nothing worked. And back in the day when nothing worked with chronic pain, they treated it with pills. Now, I'm already an alcoholic by the time I got to this point. And the only thing worse than giving an alcoholic a bottle of scotch is 100 Vicodin. And I remember getting that phone call when the nurse said, "Hey, doctor called in 100 Vicodin for you with 3 refills. Go start taking these pills right away." And so I did. I wasn't stupid. I'd been a cop a long time. I'd seen drug addiction and I'd seen alcoholism, and I'd seen them both. And, but man, I remember when I first took those pills, it was fucking amazing. It's like somebody puts a warm blanket around me and I get all fuzzy feeling, and my stress and anxiety they're gone. My pain is gone. I have energy. And I just thought, God, where have these been all my life? And for a long time, I took these pills like I was supposed to, like they were prescribed to me. But that didn't last forever. I do remember the day, though, that I knew I couldn't drink like I'd been drinking and take these pills like I was taking these pills, because I'd been at enough houses where people had died doing just that, whether by accident or on purpose. And the next thing that happened to me is in 2010, I wish I had a good story like I was chasing a bank robber, but I was going home for lunch, and I got in a serious car crash. And the result of that car crash was that I got a traumatic brain injury. Now, my traumatic brain injury showed up like this, like an absolute memory erasure. I couldn't remember anything in the short term. I could remember, who I was, and who my kids were, and, where I went to school and all that, but anything within the last week, month, minute, I couldn't remember. And so I was at home trying to recover from this, and I remember quite clearly, the brain injury was kind of cool in a weird way. Like I could watch Law and Order, and then I could watch Law and Order, and then I could watch Law and Order. And my wife hated that. But the other thing I did was I'd like, oh, it's time to take my pills. I take my pills, my pain pills, right? And I'm on like better ones by now. I'm on like Percocet and et cetera, et cetera. So I take my pills, and then 10 minutes later I'd go, oh, I don't think I took my pills. I better go take my pills. I'd watch a Law and Order, and then I'd go, God, it's 12:30. Did I take my pills at noon? I go take more pills. And it didn't take long before I went absolutely off the rails in terms of taking these medications like they were prescribed. The other thing that happened as a result of this brain injury was I lost my career. Couldn't be a cop anymore. Couldn't remember what I was doing or who I was or when I was there. And I never planned to lose my career that way. I was a cop, right? I mean, was my identity, and when I lost that, I didn't know why I was here anymore. What am I supposed to do next? What's my purpose in life? I mean, when I went to work every day in law enforcement, I really, truly felt as if I was helping people, and sitting on the couch at home was not helping anybody. And I fell into a deep depression. As I go through this process of getting a new prescription each month from my doctor, I'd take all of my pills, my 90 or 100 pills, within 4 or 5 days, and then I'm out. And then you're in withdrawal, also known as being dope sick. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of dope sick, but I'm telling you that it's like the flu times 10. Your bones feel like they're going to explode, and you can't think straight. You have crushing anxiety and depression, and the vomiting and all that goes along with it. It's debilitating, and it takes quite a while to get over. Now, as I'm going through this process where I'm getting my pills, I'm dope sick. I'm getting my pills, I'm dope sick. This is a month-to-month issue. And I'm still wondering, what the hell am I supposed to do now that I'm not a cop anymore? And I had the opportunity at one time, there was an opening at the Montana State Crime Lab here in Missoula. The crime lab takes evidence in from all over the state, analyzes it, sends it back, does their part of the state, law enforcement part of it. And initially I thought, all right, this is perfect, because if I could get back into this kind of criminal justice area, I'll get this feeling back like I have meaning and purpose in my life. And so I took that job, and it was the worst decision I've ever made. Because it wasn't long before I was at the lab, and I'm dope sick, and here comes evidence, right? I'm getting meth, I'm getting heroin, I'm getting marijuana, and I'm getting bags of pills. And one day I went into the back where the drug locker was, where there's no cameras, where nobody else was working. And I remember this like it was yesterday. I know I'm the one that opened that bag, right? But it's like I was looking down at myself opening this bag of pills. Because that was the antidote to my sickness, at least at the time. And I did that. I did that 69 times while I worked at Crime Lab from 2013 to 2014. Now, I'd been a cop a long time, and it wasn't hard to figure out, hey, this is not good, right? This is, every time I do this, this is a felony. Every time I do this has the potential of putting me in prison for 10 years. But I didn't care. I didn't even care what my family thought or what they were going through. All I wanted was those pills. And eventually, the lab, figured out, hey, something's wrong in the evidence section, and I got fired. And when I got fired, the investigation began, and like I said, I knew, here I am, I'm a retired cop, and I'm looking at spending 10 years of my life in Deer Lodge. And I can imagine for a normal person looking at prison time must be scary as hell. I was absolutely frozen in fear. And so I was sitting at the house. This is 2016. It was March 12th, 2016. My phone starts blowing up. Hey, what's going on? What's this? What's that? What's the other? And I looked, and there was a Missoulian article that said, hey, Steve Brester, retired police lieutenant, stole every bunch of pills from the lab. And I'm like, oh my God, nobody gets it. Nobody knows what this is all about. But I knew what to do. I went down and bought a bottle of scotch, and I went home and I started drinking. And then by the time my wife and then my adult son showed up home to visit that night, I decided I knew what to do next. I went down, I got a loaded revolver, and I was trying to get out of the house because I was going to put it in my mouth to pull the trigger. And I didn't want to do it in the house, make a mess for my wife. My son tackled me and disarmed me and saved my life that night. Thank you. This issue with the criminal offense, I did get 10 years in prison, was suspended, and I got 690 hours of community service. And this community service has absolutely blown my life up into something I never could have imagined. My purpose and my reason for being here and the reason I get out of bed and go to work every day is I get to work at a place called Missoula Works. And I work with, thank you, I work with homeless people, chronically homeless, get them back to work. I work with people with addiction, we get them back to work. People with criminal records, we get them back to work. And my life is absolutely full again, and I have a second chance. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. That was much easier. Betsy Mulligan-Dague has a 30-year history as a clinical social worker helping families and individuals address challenges in their lives. She has been the executive director of the Jeanette Rankin Peace Center since 2005. At the Jeanette Rankin Peace Center, Betsy continues focusing on helping people increase their communication skills to become better at peacemaking and conflict resolution. Please welcome Betsy Mulligan-Dague.
Anais Nin said that each friend represents in us a world that is quite possibly not born until they arrive. When I started at the Jeanette Rankin Peace Center, I found myself surrounded by the choir, people that thought just like me, and it was comfortable. But I believe that peace requires us to go outside the choir and meet people and perspectives that are different than us, and work on learning to understand and appreciate and even learn from those other perspectives. So I set about that work. And one of the groups that I first reached out to was veterans, because complicated history between peace activists and veterans who often seeing each other as the enemy, right? Lots of groups never returned my calls. A few didn't want to be in the same room with me or on the same committee with me. And one group told me I wasn't welcome at their events. But still, I kept searching, and that search brought me to the Veterans Day ceremonies each November that Dan Gallagher from American Legion Post 101 would organize. When I first started going, I stuck to the edge of the crowd, not really knowing if I was comfortable or welcome or not. But over the years, I edged more toward the middle, started to get a little more comfortable. I recognized some people, they recognized me, and it felt easier to be there. Dan and I had introduced each other to each other, so we knew each other. I knew him. But it wasn't until we were both interviewed for a film about the old Missoula peace sign that we actually began to talk to each other. Now, this peace sign stood a big 30-foot by 30-foot board at the top, the very top of the North Hills overlooking Missoula. You know it. It actually was used by the phone company to bounce cell signals down to the Bitterroot, right? But some activists from, I think, the north side of Missoula one night decided that it needed a peace sign on it, so they painted a peace sign on it. And the phone company painted over it, and the activists painted the peace sign back, and the Quest painted back over it, and this went on for 18 years. I loved that peace sign. Because to me, it represented everything that I was working for. It represented the world that I wanted of tolerance and acceptance and justice. It was one of the things that drew me to live in Missoula, and I was so proud to be here where this peace sign overlooked my city. So, yes. So it was such a surprise to me to find out how much Dan Gallagher hated that peace sign, detested the peace sign. Now, in the Army, he worked with explosives, and he had actually planned out how much C4 it would take to blow that peace sign up. We could have gone back to our separate worlds, and after that interview, not stayed together as friends, but something kept us together. You know, being interviewed for that film, it was interesting that the thing that divided us was actually what got us talking to each other. And we had lots and lots of 2-hour lunches at the Uptown Diner in Missoula. I was always early, he was always late, and somehow we met in the middle. I saw the pride that he had following in the footsteps of his father and his brothers and answering the call that JFK had put out to serve his country. And I also saw him trying to make sense of a 40-year disconnect between that pride and the hatred that he had seen on the faces of anti-war protesters when he came back from Vietnam in 1969. I came to see how deeply he cared and loved his fellow veterans and the people of Vietnam, especially one small girl named Thuy, who he continued to carry her picture with him. He hoped that his time there had been of some help to the people of Vietnam, and hoped with a great amount of pain that his explosives that he had planted had not harmed her or other children like her. This was a man whose sense of service above self was enormous. He was known as the lunch lady at Loyola, where he volunteered. Gave of his self to his community time and again. And he also was able to see me and see how important the peace sign was to me. Even though he hated it, he saw what it meant to me. He saw that it represented all the things I was working for, the things that were important to me, my values. Over the years, he gave me lots of things that had a peace sign on it, like this bracelet that I still have and wear. And one day he said to me, you know, your willingness to stand up for what you believe and your work for peace are just as important, just as honorable a way to serve our country as my service in the Army. What an affirming thing for me to hear. How wonderful for me to hear that, what that meant to me, for him to say that to me. In 2011, Dan asked me to speak at the Veterans Day ceremony, the same one I used to go to all the time. He jokingly offered me a flak jacket. And I have to tell you, it was probably the coldest day I can remember. And as I stood at the podium and looked out at the sea of uniforms and red, white, and blue, it's like, maybe that flak jacket might be comfortable. Nevertheless, I said what I came to say, and I said, I'm sorry. I am sorry that many of you were harassed and called names by people protesting the war. And I'm even sorrier that they did it in the name of peace, because it didn't make peace, it made division, and I regret that. I looked over and Dan's face was just full of emotion. I still have a thank you note that he wrote me telling me how much those words meant to him and how much he'd waited 40 years to let go of that pain. When I was done, and lots of people in the crowd came up to tell me the same thing, how much those words meant to them and how important it was. And I felt like I'd made a connection. I had finally found that connection, and I was part of this larger community. In 2016, Dan died. He honored me by listing me as one of his pallbearers to carry his casket to his final resting place. And I was very proud to give that last final gift to my friend Dan. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. Thank all of you for coming out tonight to support live storytelling in Missoula. Thank you to our ASL interpreters, Stella Woodrum and Bonnie Curian. Thank you most of all to our storytellers, Liz Boheim, Arthur Weatherwax, Marcia Williams, Ray Risho, Chris LaTray, Stephanie Land, Steve Brester, and Betsy Mulligan-Dague. Thank you all so much. The next Tell Us Something is in Butte on November 8th. The theme is work. We are still taking story pitches for that show. The next one in Missoula is December 11th, and the theme is Did That Really Happen? We will see you then. Have an awesome night. Thank you so much.